Normally, I do not create videos like the one you're about to watch. My channel focuses on human connection, empathy, compassion, love, holistic education, and also spirituality. The point of this video is not to be persuasive. I'm not trying to sell you on an idea or a belief. I simply want to present the knowledge and facts as I understand them about the current economic crisis that the world is in strife with. Through this knowledge, it is my hope that one can understand why so many are upset and rebellious of the current political and financial systems. This is, in all its content, an educational video. I feel many YouTubers have weighed in on a subject that is extremely complex and hard to understand, not really providing facts, but mainly providing their opinions. If you are not interested in facts, and are only interested in personal commentaries, then this video is not for you. So, let's start at the beginning. After the Great Depression in the 1930s, the United States had 40 years of economical growth without a major financial crisis. A big reason for this was because legislation was in place for the two types of banks that existed. So they were tightly regulated. These two types of banks are called commercial banks and investment banks. During these 40 years, regular commercial banks acted as local businesses, and they were not allowed to invest depositors' savings. Investment banks, which handled stock and bond trading, were very small, private partnerships. These investment banks were not public. However, this regulated, stable financial system was about to change. In the early 1980s, investment banks that were once private went public. What this did is it gave investment banks huge amounts of stockholder money. In 1981, President Ronald Reagan chose his Treasury Secretary, a man named Donald Regan, who at the time was the CEO of the investment bank, Merrill Lynch. The Reagan administration started a 30-year period of deregulation. This deregulation was continued by both Democrat and Republican administrations that followed, as well as Democrat and Republican elected representatives who sit on the Senate Finance Committee. In 1981 and 1982, legislation was passed with the help of Donald Regan and financial lobbyists to deregulate savings and loan companies. This deregulation was the Depository Institutions Deregulation and Monetary Control Act, and also the Garn-Street-Germain Depository Institutions Act. What these two bills did was they allowed savings and loan companies to make riskier investments with the depositors' money. As a result of this deregulation, hundreds of savings and loan companies had failed, and by the end of the 1980s, this S&L crisis cost taxpayers $124 billion. As a result, many American families lost their entire life savings. On January 11, 1995, President Clinton appointed Robert Ruman as Treasury Secretary. Robert Ruman, like Donald Regan, was also a CEO of an investment bank, Goldman Sachs. Treasury Secretary Robert Ruman and Clinton's economic advisor of Harvard, Larry Summers, continued to bring forth more deregulating legislation throughout the 1990s. In 1998, Citicorp and Travelers Bank merged to form Citigroup, the largest financial service company in the world. This merger was actually illegal and violated the Glass-Steagall Act, a law that was passed in 1933 after the Great Depression. The Glass-Steagall Act was important for one major reason. It prevented regular banks with consumer deposits from engaging in risky investment banking activities. Because the merger was illegal, Alan Greenspan, who was the chairman of the Federal Reserve appointed by a Republican and Democrat president, gave the Citigroup merger an exemption for 1 year. This gave Robert Ruman, Larry Summers, and investment banking lobbyists the time they needed to pass a new law, one that would overthrow the Glass-Steagall Act. This law would be known to be called the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, also known as the Financial Services Modernization Act of 1999. This law allowed commercial banks, investment banks, security companies, and insurance companies like AIG to merge with each other. During the 1997 and 1998 Congress, commercial banks, investment banks, securities firms, and insurance companies gave more than $85 million in campaign contributions, including soft money donations to Democratic and Republican parties. But the legislation still did not pass. The next congressional session, these financial industries increased campaign contributions to a little more than $150 million. The result of Gramm-Leach-Bliley being enacted was, by the end of the 1990s, the financial sector had consolidated into a few very large firms, each of them so large that their failure could jeopardize the entire financial system. The law also legalized the Citigroup merger. After Robert Ruman served his public time as Treasury Secretary for President Clinton, he was soon later given a job in the private sector. That job was Vice Chairman of Citigroup. where he would be paid $126 million. This process, moving from public service to lobbying or the corporate sector, is not uncommon. Political scientists in the United States have coined this term, the revolving door.
So the revolving door describes the way that these staffers move into the private sector, in either the corporate sector or into lobbying, and sometimes they move back to work in politics. A lot of people argue that yes, this is something we should be troubled by, in the sense that the information that these lobbyists have gained as part of their political employment can be considered as sort of insider information on how the policy process works, and in particular insider information on gaining access to politicians. So the concern here is that by using this information, these contacts and this internal knowledge of how the political process works, that particular special interests can buy privileged access to the political process and can have a major advantage in sort of gaining the policy outcomes that they want, and that these policy outcomes may not be compatible with what's best for the welfare of society.
In the early 1990s, with the advancement of technology, gave rise to a financial product called derivatives. Economists and bankers claimed derivatives made the market safer. Instead, it made it unstable. By the late 1990s, derivatives were a $50 trillion unregulated market, and our financial system was becoming more and more dependent on them. The Commodities Future Trading Commission was a government agency in charge of overseeing derivatives. In May of 1998, the chairman of this agency, Brooksley Born, seen here, made an attempt to regulate derivatives. But on May 7, 1998, Alan Greenspan, Robert Ruman, and the Senate Financial Services Committee chairman released a joint statement condemning Brooksley Born's proposal to regulate derivatives. Her proposal was overruled by President Clinton and the United States Congress that was Republican majority at that time. To make sure no one would challenge the deregulation of derivatives ever again, Senator Phil Gramm, the same senator who helped pass the Gramm-Leach-Blaley Act in 1999, also the same senator who sits as the chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, and Larry Summers, who was now the Treasury Secretary of the United States, both moved forward to pass legislation that would ban the regulation of derivatives. And that is what exactly occurred in December of 2000. Congress enacted the Commodities Future Modernization Act, outlawing the regulation of derivatives. After his time in public office as Treasury Secretary, Larry Summers would later make $20 million as a consultant to a hedge fund that relied heavily on derivatives. By the time George W. Bush took office in 2001, a complex financial system known as the securitization food chain was in place, linking all of these financial industries together. This system connected trillions of dollars in mortgages and other loans to investors all over the world. Securitization made it to where the lender, or the commercial bank, was no longer at risk if there was a failure to pay. In the old system, lenders were careful who they gave loans to, because if the borrower didn't pay, they would be out the money. But now lenders sold mortgages to investment banks. These investment banks would then combine thousands of commercial mortgages, home mortgages, car loans, student loans, and credit card debt to form extremely complex derivatives called collateralized debt obligations, also known as CDOs. The investment banks were now free to sell CDOs to investors all over the world. Now mortgage payments didn't go directly to the bank, it went to investors instead. As a result of the securitization food chain, commercial banks made riskier and more toxic loans. This did not bother investment banks because the more CDOs they sold to investors, the higher their profits. The financial sector, after almost 20 years of merging, would become dominated by 5 investment banks, 2 major financial conglomerates, and 3 securities and insurance companies. Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, had the authority to regulate the mortgage industry and put an end to the securitization chain. This power was given to him under the Home Ownership and Equality Protection Act, enacted in 1994. But Alan Greenspan did not bring forth any regulation. On May 30th, 2006, Henry Paulson, CEO of Goldman Sachs, was appointed Treasury Secretary by George W. Bush. Because of deregulation laws passed in the 1980s, Henry Paulson was forced to sell his Goldman Sachs stock, but did not have to pay any taxes on it. This saved him $50 million. Which brings us to Chris Cox. In 2004, The Securities and Exchange Commission, chaired by Chris Cox, allowed investment banks to increase their borrowing leverage ratio from 18 to 1 to 33 to 1. This allowed them to create more CDOs with their borrowed money, fueling the economic bubble even more. Finally, in 2008, all of the toxic CDOs that the investment banks had created and all of the credit default swaps that the insurance companies like AIG had created came to a crash. Before this crash, investment banks were betting against the same CDOs they were selling to their investors. As a result, when the market collapsed, investment banks made billions of dollars. The next video that I create will be a commentary on the video that you just watched, as well as a commentary on the Occupy Wall Street movement. If you have any questions pertaining to this video or any comments, please feel free to leave them below. All right, that's it. Thanks everyone. Peace and love. Take care.